Apple Podcast title, The Mystery of the Little People, Mushrooms, The Deep Dive. Apple Podcast description. Uncover the bizarre and unsolved world of hallucinogenic bolete mushrooms in this deep dive. We explore the elusive Landmyoa asiatica, a psychoactive fungus known to cause Lilliputian hallucinations, vivid visions of tiny, colorful people and animals. From historical accounts of mushroom madness in Papua New Guinea and ancient Chinese Taoist texts to modern-day poisonings in Yunnan and a surprising dinner with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, we unpack the science, culture, and mystery behind these psychedelic fungi. Perfect for curious minds eager to learn about ethnomycology, undiscovered chemical constituents, and the fascinating history of edible boletes. SEO keywords: hallucinogenic bolete mushrooms, Landmyoa asiatica, Lilliputian hallucinations, psychoactive fungi, psychedelic mushrooms, ethnomycology, Yunnan edible boletes, mushroom madness. Apple Podcast description.
Imagine you sit down at a fantastic, really high-end restaurant for this sprawling dinner.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Right, and you're presented with this incredibly fragrant, just umami-rich mushroom hot pot.
It's delicious. It's earthy, perfectly textured. You finish your meal, you head home, and you go to sleep.
Normal night.
Exactly, a normal night. But hours later, you wake up, you wander into your kitchen, and you look at a dripping water faucet. Suddenly, you watch as each individual drop of water turns into a tiny insect, hits the sink, and physically crawls away.
Wow.
You blink, right? You look over at your dining room table, and you notice an entire regiment of 2-centimeter-tall soldiers.
2 centimeters?
Yeah, tiny. Just perfectly detailed, marching in strict formation right across your tablecloth.
Honestly, it sounds like a scene pulled straight out of some surrealist film or, I don't know, a strange cartoon.
It really does. But for a highly specific subset of people, this is a very real, thoroughly documented medical and pharmacological phenomenon.
Yeah, it is.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are exploring the bizarre, unsolved, and just highly specific world of hallucinogenic bolete mushrooms.
A truly wild topic. It is. We're zeroing in on a group of fungi that are widely known in China as xiaorenren, which translates directly to the little people mushrooms.
Which is such a fitting name. And our source material for today's analysis is this incredibly comprehensive, heavily cited Wikipedia article.
Right.
It maps out the taxonomy of these fungi, the historical and anthropological records of their use, and the really cutting-edge chemical research currently trying to decode them.
And our mission today is to unpack the rich ethnomycological history, the cultural culinary practices, and this ongoing scientific race to identify the entirely unknown active compounds hiding inside these boletes.
It's a race that is still very much active today.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the clinical data, the presentation of these hallucinations completely breaks the mold of what we expect from psychoactive fungi.
Oh, completely.
Like when you look at the pharmacology of traditional tryptamines, you expect shifting colors.
Geometric overlay.
Yeah, geometric overlay, an altered default mode network. But seeing tiny soldiers, drops of water metamorphosing into bugs.
It's so weird.
It is remarkably specific and weirdly consistent across completely disparate demographics.
What's fascinating here is that despite that consistency, modern science remains entirely in the dark.
Entirely.
Unlike the classic tryptamines like psilocybin or the isoxazoles like mosmol, the stuff found in the Amanita muscaria, we still have absolutely no idea what molecular mechanism makes these boletes psychoactive.
None. Zero.
We have centuries of epidemiological evidence that they do it, but the actual chemistry is a total blank spot in our biological knowledge.
Which means we are looking at a genuine scientific frontier. So today we're taking you on a global journey. We're going to travel from the high-end culinary scene of modern China to the ancient highlands of Papua New Guinea.
A serious global footprint.
Definitely. And we'll dive into a mystery that continues to baffle some of the best analytical chemists in the world. So let's start at the epicenter of this phenomenon, the Yunnan province in southwestern China.
Right, so Yunnan is internationally recognized as a global hotspot for fungal diversity.
Yeah.
And foraging for wild mushrooms isn't just a hobby there. It's a foundational part of the local culture and the regional economy.
So these aren't some rare hidden thing.
Not at all. The boletes we are focusing on today, primarily species like Landmyoa asiatica and Butyroboletus rosaflavus, they aren't treated as illicit substances.
They aren't sold in back alleys.
Exactly. They are highly prized, premium culinary ingredients sold right out in the open in local markets.
The locals actually refer to them as Jian Shou King, which roughly translates to turning blue when bruised or cut.
Right, that rapid oxidation.
Yeah. If you take a knife to the stem, the flesh almost instantly oxidizes. It turns this vivid, deep blue-green color. And here's the absolute crucial detail for anyone encountering these in a kitchen.
You have to cook them.
You have to cook them thoroughly. The strict local wisdom dictates boiling them for at least 15 to 25 minutes at a rolling boil.
And that intense thermal processing relies on sustained heat to break down and denature the psychoactive compounds.
It cooks the trip right out of them.
Exactly. If you adhere to the culinary rules, you are rewarded with a delicious porcini-like dish. But if a chef rushes the order, or if the temperature drops even a little bit, the active metabolites survive.
And the little people show up.
The little people show up. And the historical precedent for this specific interaction goes back incredibly far.
How far are we talking?
Around 300 CE, the Chinese Taoist scholar Ge Hong wrote a foundational text called The Master Who Embraces Simplicity. In it, he details something he called the flesh-spirit mushroom.
That is an intense name.
It is. Ge Hong was deeply focused on alchemy and the pursuit of immortality, so his documentation of local flora is incredibly detailed.
Okay.
He explicitly noted that if you consume this flesh-spirit mushroom raw, you might literally see a tiny person riding in a carriage.
A tiny person in a carriage from 300 CE.
Yeah, and he wrote that the experience would grant immediate transcendence.
So we have this highly specific visual hallucination of tiny, detailed figures documented in the regional literature for roughly 1,700 years.
It's a remarkable piece of continuous ethnobotanical history.
It really is. But the phenomenon is not geographically isolated to China. Let's shift the map a bit.
Let's do it.
Imagine you are in the western highlands of Papua New Guinea, sometime between the 1930s and 1950s.
Okay, totally different environment.
Completely. Anthropologists and missionaries operating in the region began reporting that the indigenous Kuma people were consuming local bolete mushrooms, specifically a species known as Boletus manicus.
Right.
And these mushrooms triggered a temporary state of what observers termed madness.
The anthropological reports described a form of collective mania. The individuals who consumed the mushrooms would experience Lilliputian hallucinations.
Again, the tiny people.
Again, the hallmark symptom of seeing tiny people and animals alongside this really erratic behavior. And this caught the attention of the broader scientific community in the 1960s.
Because it sounded like a massive psychedelic discovery.
Exactly. It drew in the legendary mycologists Gordon Wasson and Roger Heim. They traveled to Papua New Guinea, surveyed roughly 400 local mushrooms, and eventually narrowed the culprits down to 6 species, driving this localized mushroom madness.
And remember, they were fresh off their groundbreaking work with Maria Sabina in Mexico.
The psilocybin discovery.
Right. So they were primed to discover another massive, paradigm-shifting psychoactive compound. They gathered samples of Boletus manicus and sent them directly to Albert Hofmann's lab in Switzerland.
You'd expect the team that isolated psilocybin and synthesized LSD to find the smoking gun instantly.
You really would. But the mass spectrometry and the chromatography results were, well, entirely anticlimactic.
Yeah, Hoffman found only trace amounts of 3 unidentified indolic compounds.
Just traces.
Just traces. And while indoles share structural similarities with serotonin and many classic psychedelics, the quantities present in the boletes were just minuscule.
So it didn't make mathematical sense.
Right. For those trace amounts to trigger the dramatic behavioral shifts reported among the Kuma people, the unidentified compounds would need to possess a binding affinity and potency essentially on par with pure LSD.
Which was a pharmacological leap the scientific community at the time simply refused to make.
It was too much for them to accept.
Heim even attempted to self-experiment. He consumed small amounts of the mushroom himself.
Brave guy.
Yeah, but he only noted some unusually vivid dreams, nothing resembling the full-blown Lilliputian delirium the locals experienced.
And because they couldn't isolate a definitive high-concentration active chemical, Heim, Wasson, and the anthropologist Marie Ray ultimately concluded that the mushroom madness wasn't pharmacological at all.
Wait, they just dismissed it.
They wrote it off entirely as a form of social catharsis. They essentially argued that the indigenous population was just engaging in a ritualistic theatrical acting out, that it was influenced by cultural expectation rather than actual chemistry.
Wow. It's a classic, frustrating example of mid-century scientific hubris. They effectively said, our lab equipment didn't flag a massive alkaloid concentration, therefore your cultural experience must be psychosomatic.
This raises an important question about how Western scientific paradigms have historically marginalized indigenous knowledge systems. By dismissing the phenomenon as mere theater, they effectively closed the book on the research for decades.
Just shut it down.
Completely. Giorgio Samarini, a contemporary psychedelic researcher, has published extensive critiques on how premature and damaging that dismissal was.
And there's a real measurable fallout from that, right?
There is. When researchers finally returned to survey the Kuma villages in 2006, they discovered that much of the local knowledge about these mushrooms had been completely lost to time.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. The last documented instance of someone in the area intentionally consuming them for their hallucinogenic properties was way back in the mid-1980s.
Because Western science closed the book on this in the 60s, we almost lost the thread entirely. It took over 50 years for researchers to realize this wasn't an isolated cultural quirk, it was a global botanical puzzle.
A massive one.
Which brings us to a major breakthrough in 2024. Researcher Colin Domnauer launched an expedition to the Cordillera Mountains in the northern Philippines.
Right.
And he found that the indigenous populations there regularly consume a blue-staining bolete they call seedsdom. And when it's undercooked, it irregularly triggers vivid visions of entities they call the ancessit, which translates, yet again, to little people.
So we are looking at three entirely distinct cultures. In China, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines.
Yeah.
These populations are separated by massive geographical, historical, and linguistic barriers.
Right.
Yet they all report the exact same, highly specific visual hallucination from related blue-staining boletes.
It's undeniable at that point.
From a pharmacological standpoint, that points overwhelmingly toward a shared objective chemical trigger. It completely rules out that old cultural suggestion theory.
So let's look at the clinical profile of that trigger. If you ingest undercooked Landmao asiatica in Yunnan, what exactly is happening to your nervous system?
It's intense.
Very. The clinical term for the primary symptom is Lilliputian hallucinations. Patients consistently report seeing swarms of tiny humans, sometimes brightly colored, sometimes wearing elaborate little outfits.
But the visions aren't strictly humanoid, right?
No, they see tiny animals too. Rabbits, squirrels, insects, all interacting with their environment like it's totally normal.
In addition to the Lilliputian figures, patients frequently experience geometric patterning. They get macropsia and micropsia, where objects appear wildly distorted in size.
Alice in Wonderland syndrome, basically.
Exactly. And the sensation that stationary walls are breathing or physically shifting. There's a fascinating medical case documented from 1997 where a young woman reported watching her shoelaces physically detach from her shoes, transform into butterflies, and fly out of the room.
That is so wild. The subjective effects are incredibly profound, but the pharmacokinetics are what really stand out to me.
The timeline is strange.
Very. With classic psilocybin mushrooms, you expect the onset of effects within maybe 30 to 60 minutes, and it resolves entirely in about 4 to 6 hours.
Right.
But with these boletes, the onset time is drastically delayed. Patients typically don't experience the first hallucinations until 6 to 24 hours post-ingestion.
Which is an agonizingly long metabolic runway. You've digested the meal hours ago.
And you've probably gone to sleep.
Exactly. And once the intoxication begins, it is incredibly persistent. Symptoms routinely last for days. In more severe toxicity cases, the psychiatric effects have been documented lingering for months.
Which really highlights the severe human impact here. While the idea of seeing tiny, colorful people sounds whimsical in a vacuum, a multi-day inescapable hallucination is a severe medical event.
It's a crisis.
It is. The sources highlight a profoundly tragic case from 2014. A woman in Yunnan who had recently lost her daughter somehow discovered that the delirium induced by these mushrooms allowed her to hallucinate visions of her deceased child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she intentionally and repeatedly consumed the toxic undercooked boletes for 8 years, subjecting her brain to constant chemical stress just to experience those specific visions.
It's a sobering demonstration of the psychological weight these compounds carry. And from a public health perspective, these poisonings represent a major logistical burden for regional hospitals.
I'm sure.
Consider the massive epidemiological report published in Yunnan back in 1991. It analyzed 300 individual cases of bolete poisoning.
With a data set of 300 clinical cases, you would think doctors could isolate a clear toxicological profile that the earlier Western researchers missed. What did the clinical presentation look like at that scale?
It was severe. While most patients experienced the classic Lilliputian hallucinations, the acute cases presented with severe psychosis-like symptoms. intense auditory hallucinations, profoundly disorganized thinking, and what the attending physicians described as personality disintegration.
That sounds terrifying.
It gets worse. Many patients descended into a prolonged stupor. When doctors ran electroencephalograms, or EEGs, on those stuporous patients, the brainwave abnormalities strongly resemble the cortical changes typically seen in patients administered massive doses of LSD.
How does an emergency room manage 300 patients experiencing that level of neurological disruption without even knowing what the target receptor is?
Empirically, they discovered that administering chlorpromazine was highly effective.
What's that?
It's a first-generation antipsychotic medication that acts primarily as a dopamine antagonist. It was really effective in stabilizing the patients and managing the acute symptoms.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah, and the reassuring data point here is that across these massive case series, including a more recent 2024 study tracking 81 patients, there were 0 fatalities.
Wow, 0.
0 fatalities. With proper supportive care, almost all patients made a full neurological recovery within 1 to 5 days.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, especially in the context of global diplomacy.
The Yellen story.
Yes. This highly localized, incredibly potent mushroom phenomenon recently crashed right into the middle of international geopolitics.
Such a bizarre crossover.
In the summer of 2023, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen traveled to Beijing for high-stakes diplomatic talks. Shortly after arriving, she and her delegation dined at a highly regarded Yunnan restaurant chain.
Right.
And she purposefully ordered a dish featuring Lanmao asiatica, the exact hallucinogenic boletes we're analyzing today.
It triggered an immediate international media frenzy.
Yeah.
Janet Yellen ate magic mushrooms, became a massive headline across global news outlets.
It's a surreal intersection of macroeconomics and ethnobotany,
Yeah.
but it really highlights the cultural disconnect we talked about earlier. The restaurant's culinary team knew exactly how to handle the ingredient. They subjected the mushrooms to the precise thermal processing required, entirely denaturing the psychoactive metabolite.
And the result.
Secretary Yellen experienced a fantastic umami-rich meal and 0 hallucinations.
It perfectly encapsulates the dichotomy in how these fungi are perceived. When the Western press covered the dinner, the narrative was entirely focused on the psychedelic novelty, the implicit danger, the whole magic mushroom framing.
Exactly. Whereas for the millions of people living in Yunnan and the indigenous groups in the Philippines that Colin Domnau are embedded with, the psychoactive potential isn't the draw at all.
It's actually an annoyance.
Right. They value the mushroom purely for its flavor profile, which is incredibly rich and savory. The hallucinogenic properties are viewed as a punishing consequence of poor culinary technique, not a recreational feature.
It functions very similarly to the culinary culture surrounding fugu, or pufferfish, in Japan.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
The appeal lies entirely in the delicacy of the meat. The deadly tetrodotoxin is simply a biological obstacle that a highly trained chef must carefully navigate.
Which brings us to the core scientific void at the center of this deep dive. We have a wildly popular culinary dish that doubles as a potent, multi-day hallucinogen. What is the active constituent?
The million-dollar question.
What is the specific molecule crossing the blood-brain barrier and generating these Lilliputian visions? The reality is that as of 2025 and 2026, the global scientific community still doesn't know.
We really don't. But we have definitively ruled out the usual suspects.
Okay, what do we know it isn't?
Rigorous liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry have confirmed it does not contain psilocybin or psilocin.
So no classic magic mushrooms.
Right. It also does not contain muscimol or ibotenic acid.
Okay.
Because of this massive blind spot, researchers like Colin Domnauer and mycologist Bryn Dentinger, who is widely considered one of the world's preeminent experts on bolete taxonomy, they have dedicated their current research to isolating the compound.
They've been running advanced animal assays using chemical extracts pulled directly from Lanmao asiatica.
Yeah.
They started with behavioral studies on a rhesus monkey several years ago and have recently scaled down to testing murine models. Mice, basically.
And the behavioral outputs in the lab closely mirror the clinical presentations in the human hospital data.
What do the mice do?
When the mice are administered the bolete extract, their locomotor activity spikes drastically. They exhibit intense, erratic hyperactivity.
Interesting.
But that is quickly followed by a prolonged, highly uncharacteristic physical stupor that can last for up to 2 days.
So the laboratory assays prove the extract is biologically active. But isolating the specific molecule from that chemical soup is proving incredibly complex.
Very complex.
One of the initial hypotheses that gained traction among geneticists was horizontal gene transfer.
Right, horizontal gene transfer. It's a fascinating mechanism where organisms essentially swap genetic material outside of traditional reproduction.
Like stealing code from your neighbor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Researchers hypothesized that millions of years ago, these boletes might have absorbed the biosynthetic gene clusters responsible for producing hallucinogens directly from a neighboring psilocybe mushroom sharing the same soil ecosystem.
That makes so much sense.
It's an elegant theory. Genetic absorption happens in the fungal kingdom more frequently than you might expect.
It makes logical sense. If it causes hallucinations, maybe it stole the blueprint for hallucinations from a known psychedelic.
Exactly. However, a comprehensive genomic analysis published in 2023 entirely dismantled that theory.
Back to square one.
Yep. Researchers sequenced the genomes of 12 of the 13 accepted species of Landmauer. They specifically hunted for the known gene clusters that synthesize psilocybin and ibotenic acid. And the results were completely negative. The genetic architecture just isn't there.
Which means we can entirely rule out the stolen gene hypothesis.
Yes.
Dennis McKenna, a prominent pharmacognosist and psychedelic researcher, proposed an alternative pharmacological model. He theorized that the clinical presentation, specifically the true hallucinations, where the user interacts with entities that aren't there, coupled with the extended stupor, closely resembles an anticholinergic delirium.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, McKenna's theory is highly compelling.
How so?
When he suggests an anticholinergic delirium, he's pointing away from the classic serotonin 5-HT2A pathways we see with tryptamines.
The usual psychedelic route.
Right. Instead, he's suggesting the presence of compounds that block the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, similar to the tropane alkaloids found in datura, or deadly nightshade.
Okay, that is a very different kind of trip.
Very different. That mechanism induces a true waking dream state, where the user completely loses the ability to distinguish the hallucination from baseline reality.
But even with McKenna's hypothesis, the exact molecule remains elusive. The absence of known biosynthetic pathways and the failure to match the pharmacological effects to any currently cataloged compound leads us to a thrilling conclusion.
We are almost certainly looking at an entirely novel, previously undiscovered class of hallucinogenic molecules.
That is amazing.
This isn't just a new species of mushroom. It represents a completely new branch of psychoactive chemistry hiding in plain sight.
And this isn't an obscure mystery strictly confined to the high altitudes of Asia and the South Pacific.
Not at all.
Closely related Landmauer species, specifically fungi like Landmauer pallidorosia and Landmauer flavorubra, grow wild right across North America.
Which immediately begs the question. If these related species are growing in our local forests, why aren't emergency rooms in the US or Europe fielding reports of hikers experiencing Lilliputian hallucinations?
Right. If they're in our backyard, why aren't people seeing tiny soldiers?
It fundamentally comes down to deeply ingrained cultural foraging habits. In North America and Europe, there is a profound, pervasive mycophobia, a cultural fear of wild mushrooms.
We don't really forage the way they do in Yunnan.
We don't. And there is a very specific taught stigma against consuming any wild mushroom that rapidly changes color, especially those that oxidize to a vivid blue when bruised. In Western foraging traditions, that rapid blue staining is widely taught as a universal warning sign for toxicity.
So because Western foragers are explicitly taught to avoid these specific blue staining boletes, nobody's taking them home and undercooking them.
Exactly.
Any psychoactive properties they might possess have simply flown completely under the radar.
Precisely. The cultural filter is so strong that the data simply doesn't exist. They've been missed entirely by Western recreational foragers and clinical toxicologists alike.
It really makes you wonder how many times you might have stepped right over a completely uncatalogued, mind-altering compound on a casual weekend hike.
Probably more times than you'd think.
So let's recap the breadth of this incredible deep dive. We started with a widely enjoyed premium culinary delicacy in Yunnan that requires exact thermal processing to prevent a multi-day psychological break.
Right.
We traced the ethnobotanical records back to ancient Taoist texts promising transcendence via visions of tiny figures and carriages. We analyzed how Western scientific hubris prematurely dismissed the mushroom madness of indigenous tribes in Papua New Guinea, only for those exact same highly specific visions to be corroborated by populations in the Philippines decades later.
The pattern is undeniable.
It is. And sitting at the center of all this data is a completely novel pharmacological mystery that continues to baffle the world's most advanced analytical chemists.
Looking at the sheer scope of the sources we've unpacked today, I always come back to the same thought. What stands out to you? For me, it's the profoundly humbling realization that despite our advanced genome sequencing, our mass spectrometry, and our predictive protein models, modern science has barely scratched the surface of the natural world.
We think we know everything, but we don't.
Not even close. A completely novel, highly potent, mind-altering compound isn't buried in ice in Antarctica. It's sitting in a popular culinary dish, being served to global diplomats in major metropolitan restaurants.
So what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you process all of this. If a heavily commercialized, widely popular edible mushroom has successfully hidden a radically novel hallucinogenic compound from the world's best scientific minds for over a century, what other everyday foods, native plants, or common fungi growing right in our own backyards might possess hidden, profound pharmacological properties?
It's a fascinating question.
Properties that are just waiting for the exact right, or exactly wrong, preparation to unlock them. And the next time you're standing at the stove cooking dinner, just remember, the line between a delicious, savory meal and a multi-day visit from the little people might just be a matter of 3 minutes on the burner.